In the next chapter of EcoResolution's learning journey, we're exploring non-violent direct action, or the role of social movements and direct action in systemic change. We're joined by Satish Kumar, a former monk and long-term peace and environmental activist who has been setting the global agenda for change for more than 50 years. So how are you, Satish?
I'm very well.
Good.
Good to be on your program.
Good. I'm so grateful for you to be here. You've been one of the greatest inspirations in our learning and completely transforming how we understood change and the relationship to change of kind of self, society, and also the land, soil. Yeah. And Satish, so you were born into a family of Jains in India. And just to begin, I'd love to hear how that impacted your worldview.
Yes. Jain religion is India's one of the smallest religion. There are 4 Indian indigenous religions: Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs. So Jain tradition is very much rooted in the principle of non-violence. Non-violence to yourself, non-violence to other people, and non-violence to nature. Nature, people, and self are all one in the end. And therefore be non-violent to all living beings, including yourself and including any smallest of the small creatures. May they be earthworms or mosquitoes, and of course, all the other animals. So I became a monk at age 9, and I started to practice principle of non-violence from that very beginning of my life. And when I walked at night, I will not walk out of the house, only within the house, because at night you don't see any insects or any creatures you might tread on. Therefore, you always stay indoor. And even when within the house, if you are moving from one room to another, you have a little broom in your hand, a very soft woolen broom, and you sweep the space before you put your feet down, before you walk. And so there is no creature should come under your feet by any accident or any unknowingly. So non-violence goes so far deep, but also being non-violent to yourself also means that not being angry, not being in any kind of fear, because anger and fear are violence to yourself. When you are angry, you are being violent to yourself. You are anxious, you are being violent to yourself. So avoid being angry, fearful, anxious, worried, all these things. And always remain equanimous, joyful. Whatever comes in life, whether ups or downs, pain or pleasure, dark or light, good or bad, everything is part of life. So you accept everything with equanimity and be kind to all living beings. So that was my training as a Jain monk for 9 years.
Wow. Thank you, Satish. It's really interesting to hear you talk about this concept of non-violence, equanimity, acceptance, kindness, importance of joy, and the joy over anxiety, fear, and anger. And it's very interesting, the tension between that and the general understandings of activism, which is often driven by anger, fear, anxiety, or wanting to create change, which is often seen as a violent form of creating change. So then if we bring together the non-violence with the active transformation through protest,
yeah.
How do we come over this conflict, and how can we see it not as two conflicting things, but as two things that can work together in a really regenerative way?
Yes, very good question. Jains are encouraged to be activists. We are not encouraged to be passive. We are always encouraged to be activists. And Mahatma Gandhi was influenced by Jainism. and he was a great activist. Now you can act out of two different kinds of emotions. One, you can act out of anger because you are angry about social injustice, about racialism, about destruction of the environment, about pollution of the oceans with plastic and other things, poisoning of the soil, animals in factory farms being cruelly treated. All that can cause you anger, and you can act out of anger. But the Jains will say that that emotion is not right. You need to act, of course, but you have to act out of compassion. So instead of anger, you are using compassion for the oceans, compassion for the animals, compassion for the soil, compassion for the poor, compassion for those who are being mistreated racially or gender discrimination or any kind of exploitation, subjugation, injustice. All that needs to be resisted, and needs, like Mahatma Gandhi, resisted all negative things. But he was inspired by compassion rather than by anger. So it is up to you. But Jains will say that act and act and act, but act out of compassion for the world and not out of anger for the world. You have to be compassionate even for those who are exploiting the world, even those who are subjugating the world, even those who are committing violence and going into war. Even you have to have compassion for them, but they don't know what they are doing. They are in ignorance. They need our help and our compassion to understand that exploiting the earth or subjugating animals or polluting oceans or going to war or exploiting the poor or exploiting the weak or discriminating against the blacks or discriminating against the women, any kind of work you are doing is coming out of ignorance. And therefore we have to help them to understand, to be conscious, to be enlightened, and to act properly. So this is what Buddha did. This is what the founder of Jain religion, Mahavira, did. This is what Mahatma Gandhi did. So we have a pedigree of great activists who acted for the world in compassion, like Dalai Lama is acting out of compassion, and Vandana Shiva and Wangari Maathai acting out of compassion. So you can act out of compassion rather than out of anger.
Because if we're fueled by anger, I suppose we burn out very, very quickly. Whereas if we're fueled by compassion and by love, we can keep the flame burning inside. And
Absolutely.
It's a completely different approach to life and to relationship as well. And I think as well with compassion, you're celebrating all of our interconnections and what we share with others rather than what makes us different to others sometimes. So, yeah. And it's like when we are celebrating our diversity, it's when we can really celebrate multiplicity and a much more sustainable and harmonious approach to living. And I find often in what's so revelatory in the way that you approach change is this emphasis always on interconnectivity. It's never just society, it's soil, soul, and society. It's never just protesting, it's protesting, protecting, and building alternatives. And I see that very much rooted in how we began the conversation talking about this kind of Jain concept and this more holistic understanding of change and relationships and of worldview.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now the thing is that you talked about interconnectedness. That is a very important key. In Jain tradition and Gandhian tradition, we don't see the split, separation, disconnection. We don't see us and them and blaming them for the injustice in the world or for the exploitation of nature in the world. We don't see as a kind of blaming others. We are all in it together. For example, if the consumers did not collaborate and cooperate with the materialistic society, then there will be no materialism. But if we buy plastic, then we are part of it. And then we blame and complain about others, and we participate in it. So Mahatma Gandhi said that non-violent, non-cooperation is the way. So we don't cooperate in the exploitation of the world, exploitation of the poor, exploitation of nature. So we withdraw our cooperation, and then we lovingly communicate with other people and say why we are doing it. Like a radiator radiates heat, an activist radiates this compassion and kindness, but also a radical idea, the radical love. Love is not a passive thing. It's a radical love that you radiate, and then you influence other people. This is interconnectedness, is the fundamental to nonviolent action.
I love that image of radiating radical love and interconnectedness fundamental to nonviolent direct action. And I wondered, I was, when we read about you, you often, there's this description of a moment when you changed when you were 18 and began campaigning for land reform. Was there something that inspired you? Like what made you have a change in path? Was it an individual or social context? Like, what was that inspiratory moment?
When I was a monk, I was practicing nonviolence much more on an individual basis. I was practicing nonviolence for myself mainly, by my own salvation, my own liberation, my own freedom. But Mahatma Gandhi's idea was that we are not separate individuals. We have to live in the world and practice nonviolence and love and radical love in the world. And so I was very inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's teachings. I said to myself that I will go out of my monastic order and live in the world and practice spirituality, nonviolence, truth, radical love, all these things. A revolutionary love, you can call it. Radical love is a revolutionary love. So when you practice revolutionary love, radical love in the world, and so I went to Gandhian movement led by Vinoba Bhave, who was going from village to village and landlord to landlord, asking them to contribute and donate land for the poor, for the landless, so that we can bring an end to this social injustice and poverty. And so I became part of that social activism, social movement, non-violent social movement. And so we were going to the landlords and trying to change their heart. Before we change their action, we have to change their mindset. We have to change their views. They have to change their attitude to nature and to people and to the land. So we were saying to them that you are thinking at the moment that you are the owner of the land. But actually, you are not born with the land. You came without anything, and you will go away without anything. Land is here as a gift of the universe. So land belongs to everybody, all creatures, humans, animals, insects. Everybody can live on this land. And so you have to change your attitude and shift your attitude from the idea of ownership of land to relationship with the land. So ownership and relationship. So that was the work. And once you change that attitude, when you change that intention and motivation and a kind of worldview that we are not the owners of the land, we are the servants of the land, we are the children of the land, and we work the land, take care of the land for everybody. This view was the kind of idea. And so we were working with the landlord, and we managed to get these landlords a gift of the land. They donated land for the poor. And under Vinoba Bhave's, this Gandhian non-violent social movement, we collected 4 million acres of land and distributed that 4 million acres among the poor. But when we distributed them, we said to them, you have this land, but you are not the owner. You have a relationship with the land. You are a trustee of the land. You take care of the land. You grow your food, but you are not the owner. When you don't want to grow food, but don't want to work on the land, you give it to somebody who wants to work on the land. So this was a kind of social movement based in non-violence and compassion. Vinoba Bhave and Mahatma Gandhi were trying to bring the kingdom of compassion on this earth and changing people's thinking and changing people's views is as important as changing the systems, changing the economic arrangement, changing capitalism, changing socialism, changing consumerism, materialism. All this outer change and inner change are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have outer change, system change, without changing your worldview and changing your own inner attitude. And so inner change, outer change coming together was one of the most important steps towards a non-violent social order.
And I love how you were talking just now about giving land away, but then you're not the owner. We are simply looking after it. And it's this idea of stewarding that I think is quite important here. And it's like how we can steward the land that we live on or look after, or the environments that we find ourselves in, not as our own, but as the caretakers of it for a short while. And it's a much more traditional and I suppose more indigenous approach to like property and how we relate to that. And the great irony, of course, is that right now with global multinational seed companies and things like that, even though they don't own the land, there are other more complicated forms of ownership that are coming into the system and denying the capacity of peoples to really steward land, like with the like biopiracy of the seed companies and the monoculture with the genetic modification. And because obviously when you buy a seed from a genetically modified company, you can only buy seed from them, and you can't then trade seeds, and so there's kind of these other ways, these power structures that come into the system. And I know that that's had a terrible impact in India, for example, just going back to the work that you were doing with Vinoba Bhave there, like redistributing land. But then the power still seems to somehow come back and reappropriate. And how do you go about sustaining resistance to those sorts of powers when it seems to come back no matter what? And
the reason that comes back is because we have not changed our worldview, and we are in a confusion of means and ends. At the moment, the consumerism, materialism, production, consumption, economic growth, profit, these have become the end. And human beings and nature and land had become the means to make profit, to have more production, to have more consumption, have more economic growth. So this is a confusion of means and ends. If we have the understanding that the means are production, consumption, money, profit, the end goal is caring for the earth, caring for human beings, well-being of people, well-being of planet, happiness and joy and good relationship and justice and equality. These are the ends. And so we should honor human life. We should honor life of nature, and money, profit, production, consumption, economic growth. These are the means to the end of well-being. If that was the attitude, then our this Monsanto and the kind of genetic engineering and kind of monoculture and mass production, factory farms, all these things will change. At the moment, these things are happening because the aim of society is to have economic growth. The aim of society to make bigger and bigger profit. The aim of society is to produce and consume more and more. If this has to change, and the aim has to change, and aim should be well-being of planet, well-being of people, caring for the planet, cleaning clean rivers, clean soil, clean forests, clean oceans, good human relationship, justice. If these were the values, and then profit and economy in the service of humanity. At the moment, human beings are just instruments of making money. You are an employee, you are working for a big corporation, be it Monsanto or some other big corporation. You are an instrument to make profit for the big company. So you are not respected as a human being, as an autonomous goal. So this confusion of means and ends has to change if we want to bring about a society. And that has to change by changing our attitude, changing our worldview, changing our understanding.
Mm. Yeah. The when we're thinking about how we protest against this confusion of means and ends, there are obviously many different ways to protest non-violently. The most traditional forms are standing in the road with a placard, or shouting, or recent examples by Extinction Rebellion of gluing ourselves to walls of banks. But an amazing example from your own life is an 8,000-mile peace pilgrimage that you took, where you walked from India across the world, calling on the different nuclear powers that were there at the time, so Moscow, Paris, London. I wanted to know if you see your peace pilgrimage as an example of nonviolent direct action, and how it could be a different approach to nonviolent direct action, and also just to hear a bit more about the pilgrimage, because it was amazing.
Yes, my pilgrimage started from the grave of Mahatma Gandhi, and it was an action, direct action and non-violent action. Because I believe, as Mahatma Gandhi believed, that non-violence must remain at all levels, uncompromisingly. In no circumstances, violence, anger, fear, hatred could be part of a non-violent action or a direct action. So my walk, and I walked without any money. And that was a kind of declaration that I'm prepared to suffer. I'm prepared to go through hardship and difficulties. Because when you have no money, you don't know anything. You don't know where you will find a shelter tonight. You don't know whether you will find any food, your lunch or dinner or breakfast, anything. So you don't know. So you have to trust. And the trust is fundamental to nonviolent direct action. Unless you have a trust in your heart and a hope in your heart that things can change, things will change, and you will be the part of that change and a part of that solution rather than a part of the problem. Unless you have that trust in your heart and your hope in your heart, you cannot be a non-violent activist. So I went around the world, 8,000 miles, walking without any money in my pocket. And I was also delivering a packet of peace tea, because I said to, as a symbol, to these leaders in the Kremlin and 10 Downing Street and in the White House and Palace Élysée, everywhere, I was saying that this cup of tea is a cup of peace. It's a cup of love. And when you have cup of tea, just think about all those people who have produced the tea, and think about all that nature, the soil which had produced the tea, and you think about the whole world which is drinking the tea, and your nuclear weapons will destroy not only your enemies, but all men, women, children, farmers, workers, lakes, rivers, forests, animals, oceans, everything will be destroyed and polluted and contaminated by your nuclear weapons. So drink a cup of tea and see in this cup of tea the whole universe. Like William Blake said, that you can see the eternity in a second. In the same way, you can see in this one cup of tea, peace tea, a cup of love, the whole universe is in this. And therefore be compassionate, be non-violent, and do not engage in any kind of warfare, and particularly not the nuclear warfare. So that was the message. And I was received for 2.5 years. I walked around the world in poor countries, rich countries, communist countries, capitalist countries, European countries, Asian countries, everywhere I walked. And I survived without any money for 2.5 years. I did not even touch money. And so I survived, and that shows, the example shows that trust can work. Nonviolence does work. Peaceful, compassionate action does work. And I could go around the world. And so I would like to say that have trust and faith and hope in your heart and act throughout your life. And what you achieve doesn't matter, because achieving is, your action is its own reward. You are achieving by your action. You are achieving peace with your own action. See, everybody act for peace and for with non-violence and for justice and for sustainability and for the integrity of the planet Earth. All the great ideals that we hold dear in our hearts. If we act and do our best, then world will be a good place, and changes have taken place. If you take the example of the history in the last 100 years, colonialism was very strong. But now colonialism has ended. Apartheid was very strong, but apartheid has ended. Even the racial discrimination is much less than at the time of slavery, or at the time even of Martin Luther King. At that time, nobody could have thought that a black man like Barack Obama could be president of the United States of America in the White House. So the changes have come. Even in last 50 years, the change has come in gender equality and women's rights. Although we have a long way to go in every field, but we should not just think pessimistically. We should also celebrate the great changes we have achieved and society has achieved. So celebrate what we have achieved and continue more, strive more to get even better and better.
It often feels as though time is running out. Like, we've got to create change because it's now or never. And I love that you did a pilgrimage, and that pilgrimage seems to be a strong theme in your whole life, because that's all about slowness and enjoying the moment and celebrating the moment and celebrating nature and life and relationship. And it's this kind of contrast that brings us back to the reality that we're only fighting for something that we really love. And so if we're not able to enjoy it, then it's not really worth the struggle. It's not worth the suffering that we would end up risking.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the action should bring happiness. Mahatma Gandhi said that when I go to prison, I go to prison like a bride goes to wedding chamber. So going to prison should not be some sort of mourning, groaning, and saying, oh, why I'm in prison? Why are you putting in prison? I'm not guilty. I'm working for the good cause. No, I have broken the law. I am guilty of breaking your unjust and unfair and vicious law. And therefore, I am happy to go to prison until the law comes to an end. So that kind of joy in your action and being happy in your throughout life. And because, for example, like sugar in tea or milk melts and makes the bland milk into sweet milk. In the same way, we activists, when we act out of radical love and a revolutionary love, then we are making the whole society sweet and permeate throughout and transform from within. And so that kind of being sugar and being loving and compassionate, and by transforming the society into a sweet and a delicious society, that is a kind of metaphor that I think when I'm acting. So my walk was, I suffered with heat, cold, hunger, homelessness. I slept outdoor under the sky. And when I was sleeping under the sky, I would say, this is my 1-million-star hotel. Who cares for 5-star hotel? And when I did not get food, I will say, this is my opportunity to fast. I will fast for 1 day or 2 days until I get the food. Doesn't matter. And if I die while I'm walking, I'm happy to die. So I accepted the difficulties with joy. So even when you are going to jail or you are going through difficulties, you accept it with joy and not complain. We are all one. And we are part of this transformation. We are on a journey of life of transformation.
I suppose that comes from true belief in what it is that you're standing for, an absolute belief in the sense of justice that is, and faith that it is right. Otherwise, and once you have that faith, I think then everything's possible. Like, yes. If you have faith, you can have that sense of direction and purpose, belonging, and it can really sustain you. And it's funny that in our culture, faith is often belittled when, and perhaps that has a role to play in our feelings of insufficiency and the big problems that we have now with the mental health crisis and environmental crisis and social crisis. It's like, how can we bring faith back into community, not necessarily in a religious way, but in a more deeper, in a deeper and a more spiritual way?
Yeah. No, I think believing in yourself, believing in the great cause for which you are struggling and acting non-violently and lovingly. Having that belief, having that faith, having that trust in yourself and in your own conviction. And then you have a courage of your conviction. And with that courage, fearlessness and courage, you act. Whatever obstacles are along the way, doesn't matter. Because of your faith, because of your belief, because of your trust in yourself and in people and in nature and the universe and in the kind of providence, all those words are good words, because without that belief, I could not have done 8,000 miles for 2.5 years, having no money and having no family and being away from home in new countries. I could not have done that without that utter faith and belief and a kind of trust in my heart and trust in peace and trust in people and trust in the world and the universe.
And what's quite powerful as well is in your own life how you've taken this role of individual protest, but also brought it much more into play in a community, in the role of community, and how you can use your actions and then communicate them on a much bigger scale to create change. Like, I know that you moved to England, to the UK in 1973, and you became an editor of Resurgence magazine, which is a magazine spreading this message of the interconnection of soil, soul, society, and for a deeper systemic change. And you played a role in founding the Schumacher and also the Little School. And this relationship of inner transformation with outer change, but also individual action, bringing it out into community for collective change, I think is really interesting, especially the role of education, communication, and creativity also within that. Yeah.
So any change comes at 3 levels. First level is be the change that you want to see in the world. If you are not changing yourself and you expect other people to change, this will not happen. So be the change. Then second is to communicate the change. We have to communicate to other people. We can't just sit inside our closed room and say world will be fine by itself. You have to act and you have to communicate. And this is where my work with Resurgence magazine, I edited Resurgence for 43 years. So that was a way of communicating that change, non-violence, justice, ecology, sustainability, Gaia theory, all these things, self-sufficiency, organic farming, agroecology, permaculture, yoga way of life, meditation, all these things at a spiritual level, social level, personal level, ecological levels, all levels, transformation. That I was communicating through Resurgence magazine. And that's still continuing last 54 years. And Resurgence Trust is dedicated to such education, so that we organize events, we organize festival well-being, we organize evening talks. And the same way, the communicating change is Schumacher College, where we are inviting young people to come and stay there for 1 year, 6 months, 1 week, 1 weekend, whatever time you have, you come and experience that new way of life. And so we have education of head, education of heart, education of hands, not just education of head and information. Because in the universities and colleges and schools, when teachers look at a child or a young person, student, they look at the person and see they have no body. They only have a brain. They have no hands, they have no heart, they have no legs, they have no body, no senses, no feelings, only brain. But human beings are not just brain. They have a head, they have hands, they have legs, they have a heart, they have senses. So sensing, feeling, and transport. So our education at Schumacher College is education of head, but also education of heart, cultivating compassion, kindness, love, relationship, respect. All these values are also cultivated. And then also education of hands. So all our students work in the garden, in the kitchen, cleaning and preparing and craftsmanship. All these things we teach. So education of head, heart, and hands. That's the kind of key message of Schumacher College. And so the same was with the little school you mentioned, the small school. We taught children to sing, to dance, to paint, to garden, to walk in nature, and build and make something with their hands, as well as think and feel. So this is a kind of work of resurgence, work of Schumacher College, work of the small school. All these things have been in my work to communicate the change. And then the third aspect of change is organize the change. So Extinction Rebellion or Greta Thunberg's school strikes and Friday for the Future and many other actions like that, organizing people, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, WWF, these big organizations, in one way or the other, they are trying to bring about that change. So these are the three levels of change: be the change, communicate the change, and organize the change. Wow.
Yeah, it's a very complete understanding of change making. Maybe a little bit harder when you come to put it into practice yourself. But I suppose you're starting at the level of individual value systems, understanding what these are in regard to justice and the outside world, thinking about how you can start to live your life differently, and then just building outwards from there towards communication and organizing. And then say we wanted to show solidarity with others who are struggling. For example, the pipeline protests in Canada, the forest fires in the Amazon, the plights of the indigenous in Borneo. How do you see the solidarity coming into this bigger picture that you're describing?
The solidarity is very important. That's a part of non-violent communication and non-violent action and non-violent way of life. So solidarity, social solidarity, and compassion for those who are suffering. So whatever we can do, for example, indigenous people, they have so much wisdom. They have survived on this planet Earth for much longer than our industrial, materialistic consumer society of the Western Europe and America. And so we have to respect and honor their wisdom and their insights and their way of life. And therefore we need to protect that way of life. This is why when I say we protest non-violently, but we also protect beauty, we protect craftsmanship, we protect arts, we protect local communities, we protect local economy and small businesses and that kind of thing. So protecting and looking after forests, looking after animals, that's also protecting. So protection is part of social solidarity and ecological solidarity. And therefore, whatever we can do, in whatever way we can create understanding and help indigenous people to resist any encroachment on their land. For example, more and more rainforests are being cut down where indigenous people live, and those rainforests are being turned into commercial monocrop, commercial crop, kind of cash crop, factory farms, soya beans exported to China or America or somewhere. So this kind of industrialism is destroying indigenous people. But also fire is caused by climate change and the heating the planet Earth. And so we have to have solidarity with those people where there's a forest fire, but also we have to change our civilization and our industrial system so that we don't emit so much carbon into the atmosphere that atmosphere becomes unsustainable and becomes so bad that forest fires and floods and many other natural disasters happen. So we have to change our way of life, and we have to start to live. Elegant simplicity is my answer, and my new book is called Elegant Simplicity. So if we live simply, beautifully, comfortably, happily, but have a cyclical economy, so that our economy is not linear. You take from nature, you use it, and then you throw it away in the atmosphere, carbon emission or plastic pollution, whatever it is. This kind of linear economy is bringing disaster and creating poverty and destruction of indigenous cultures and creating forest fires and many other natural and social problems. So we need to live elegantly simple life where economy is cyclical. So you take everything from nature, use it and put it back in nature. Like in the autumn now, nature is growing. Apples are full, trees are full of apples. So there are thousands of apples there, but there will be no pollution and no waste. Either you eat it or you give it back to the soil, you compost it or whatever. So growth, cyclical growth is a good growth. But this linear growth of economic growth, which we have linear growth, more, and never any end, there's no cycling. So the cyclical economy, regenerative economy is the idea which we need to promote even in Europe and America in order to protect and support indigenous cultures and our forest fires and our flooding and all other things which are happening to other people. So social solidarity begins at home. Wherever we are, we can be the change and live in a way that there's no impact on indigenous people or on nature.
Yeah, so it's almost as though localization, like reframing our relationships within in a much more local way, local economy, regenerative, circular, is the best way to support.
Absolutely. The economy should be local. Our mind, our consciousness, our heart should be global. Think globally, but act locally. So we have to have our food, our clothes, our houses, our shoes, our basic necessities should come. 70 to 80% of our needs should be met locally. Only 10 or 15 or 20%, small amount of things could be traded far distant places. But 80% of our economy should be local so that we don't have this transportation going around the world, aeroplanes and ships and trains and trucks and lorries traveling around on motorways and railways and in the sky, polluting the environment, emitting the carbon, creating global warming, and destroying the local cultures, local economies, and indigenous people. And so living locally, thinking local, acting locally, and thinking globally. So our mind should be one humanity, one earth, one planet. We are all human beings before we are Americans or Chinese or Russians or Europeans or Africans or Asians or whatever. We are all human beings. So we have one earth, one humanity, one future, but at the same time, this global mind and global heart should be rooted where you live and where you work. So the local economy is very important. So think globally, but act locally.
And right now, Satish, you live in Devon, or you've lived in Devon for many decades now, and particularly, I think you've got a good relationship with Dartmoor as a place. And when we're thinking about our local relationships, supporting local economy, I always think how important it is to have deep relationship to place. Sorry, the drill has started again. But deep relationship to place that can bring us joy, and can then be fuel almost to the fire of that radical love that we've been talking about. And I wonder if you find this relationship to place has been important in your own journey. And yeah, I wonder if you wanted to share anything about that.
Absolutely. Dartmoor is my great love. And I always walk, and that sense of place and sense of being rootedness in Dartmoor and in Devon is very close to my heart. And the village where I live is called Heartland. And I have about 2 acres of land here, and my heart goes for Heartland. So heart meaning H-A-R-T, heart meaning deer. So it's a deer land. So it's a very near the sea. So I have lived in Devon, in this house, in this place in Heartland for last 40 years. So I'm totally rooted, and I want to die here in Heartland. I don't want to go anywhere else because I love the place, this sense of place and sense of connectedness and sense of rootedness in my local community. And I have so many friends and neighbors, and I love them and they love me, and we get on very well together. And I serve the local community as much as I serve the world. So my actions are global through Resurgence magazine and through Schumacher College and through my books and through my talks. I reach out the world, but at the same time, always I return home, and I am at home. I'm at home in Heartland. I'm at home in Dartmoor. I'm at home in nature. I'm at home by the sea. I am rooted in my soil, and that being rootedness gives me very joy, great joy, pleasure, and happiness.
Thank you so much, Satish. I mean, that's definitely a powerful message to end on. Like, how can we find our sense of place and our happiness and our joy and then let that be the root of all of our action when it comes to change, making change in the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder if as we end, if you want to share any final things to anybody.
No, I think this is enough. What we have said is enough. I mean, yes, I think this is enough.
Okay.
We have said all. Yeah.
We said it all. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for doing this conversation with me. I'm delighted, and always great pleasure to see you. I'm sorry that I haven't seen you face to face for a long time, but I hope soon things will change and we'll see you.
Oh, I really
Give
hope
my love to Christabel.